What's up, you guys? Ross Sapp, Fightful.com here with a different kind of content for you guys. I said I was going to be doing some more video content. This is the first in many of those. I'll be doing video interviews, some sit-downs, a lot of different stuff as it relates to Fightful, and I'm going to go over some talking points in these videos that maybe I can't go into as much detail on in the podcast, but this particular subject will be one that we have broached many times in the podcast, but I think should be really reiterated with some examples. Believability in wrestling. I can't count how many times I've seen somebody on Twitter or YouTube say, this wrestler can't believably beat this wrestler. And it's almost always exclusively tied to size, body type, height, weight, anything of that nature. Sometimes legitimate background. Now, pro wrestling, as some have said, is not a wrestling show. It is a show about wrestling. These are characters. They're people who fit roles, and they play characters of varying degrees of experience, expertise, strengths, weaknesses, backgrounds, some of which do reflect their actual backgrounds because, hey, that's what you need to play the role. But it's not always who could beat who in a shoot. Otherwise, you would just have a shoot fight. And we're not really going to get into the ins and outs of why professional wrestling became staged and all that, but we can get into the facade that this person is too little to beat that person in a believable manner. Pro wrestling is subjective. You have to suspend your disbelief to some level. There are very few people that watch the program that actually believe it's real and can decipher that type of stuff on their own anyway. But those of us who watch it and we know that it isn't real can really bank on a lot of previous examples as to why almost anybody on a professional wrestling show can beat almost anybody else. Now, is size a great beneficiary of the person who holds that advantage? Yeah, of course. That's why it's an advantage. The bigger guy is usually stronger. They're usually able to manhandle somebody. But to say that someone can't believably beat another guy when they're playing roles on a TV show about skill sets, about matchups, about styles, I can't really get with that. And I'm going to take you all the way back to 1999 and WrestleMania 15. Butterbean showed up there. Butterbean, a rather portly boxer, but had some skills, man. He wasn't completely inept or anything like that. Beat the brakes off of Bart Gunn. Now, why is Bart Gunn important? Well, because Bart Gunn was, quite frankly, a big son of a bitch that knocked out a bunch of fighters, bunch of wrestlers in shoot fights throughout the entire summer before. I mean, some of the perceived toughest guys in wrestling, from members of the Road Warriors, to Droz, to Mark Marrow, Steve Blackman, a lot of people were in this tournament. Bob Holly, the eventual JBL. They got knocked out by Bart Gunn. Butterbean beat Bart Gunn with the quickness. Now, what happened when Butterbean tried his hand at MMA? Well, here's what happened. He had varying levels of expertise. He had varying levels of strengths and weaknesses. And that really was displayed when he got beat by a 155-pound Genki Sudo. Now, you may just say, oh, fluke. It was not a fluke. Genki Sudo was the better guy, and he was definitely the better guy on that night. Would Genki Sudo have been the better guy on that night if Butterbean hit him with a three-piece? Maybe not. But that's where the believability aspect comes in. Genki Sudo got it done, and he wasn't the only one. Minowa Man, a 185-pound guy, made a career beating big dudes. Remember Giant Silva of the Oddities? Beat the brakes off of him. It wasn't hard for him either. This was a regular thing. The man's fought over 100 times. And when you look at people like that and you say, well, wait, they were 185 pounds. That's 20 pounds below the cruiserweight limit. 205 live, that's a big man. Now, all those people aren't going to be that size. All those people aren't going to have that background. All those people aren't going to be able to play that role. But not all of them do. You're not always going to see a Spike Dudley come in and beat a Brock Lesnar. That's not going to happen. But you might see a Finn Balor do it. You might see a Daniel Bryan do it. They are portrayed on this program as having a more significant skill set than a Spike Dudley. And I think that's completely fine. Look at the UFC right now, if you want to take a look at the women's side of things. Viviane Araujo, a former 115-pound fighter, stepped into a 135-pound world and won a fight. Wasn't hard for her either. She did it pretty easily. Look at other examples. Tim Sylvia, he was a big dude. Randy Couture, a pretty good-sized heavyweight, but fought at 205 pounds. Put the pain on Tim Sylvia. In one of the greatest moments in UFC history at that. This happens a lot. Hongman Choi, the guy was big, but he was a trash fighter. Sometimes you're going to have pro wrestlers that are trash fighters. Sometimes you're going to have pro wrestlers that can't beat the smaller guy. Sometimes you're going to have Emmanuel Yarbrough, this big 600-pound guy, and he gets put face down, ass up by a little Japanese fella. That's the element of combat. Styles make fights. And not always the guy that you think is unbeatable, whether you believe it or not. Sometimes you got to suspend your disbelief a little bit more, and sometimes you're not willing to do that. But to say it's not believable when history has shown that it is in fact believable, that's just outright incorrect. If it's about height, Hongman Choi, Dan McGee, Stefan Struve, Sammy Schilt, all these guys are like 7 feet tall. Is it about weight? Well, we've seen what happened with Butterbean. We've seen what's happened with Akebono. We've seen what happened with Emmanuel Yarbrough. Is it about the big juiced up guys? Because then there's Ron Waterman too. Some of you might remember him. He was a member of WWE Developmental. You'll see him in a lot of dark matches. We've called a lot on our Fightful Select service. He actually helped train Shane Carwin for Brock Lesnar. You know what else he did? He got beat by Roger Gracie, a 185-pound fighter. He got beat by several smaller fighters with fair regularity. How about Bob Sapp, former IWGP heavyweight champion at that? An okay fighter back in his day. He throws some fights these days. He got his ass whipped by people smaller than him on the regular. Mark Hunt, top 10 UFC heavyweight for quite a while. What happened to him early in his career? 185-pound Gegard Musashi beat him. 185-pound Vanderlei Silva beat him. Melvin Manhoof beat him. Now, when I say 185 pounds, a lot of these people used to cut to that weight, but I mean, they've been there. They ain't floating around much bigger than 205 in a lot of these cases. And the smaller man can beat the bigger man. The smaller woman can beat the bigger woman. Believability is what you make it. Now, I do understand. If you got Spike Dudley or Jim Cornette out there beating Brock Lesnar, we got a problem. But don't tell me that it's not believable. Don't tell me that it's not realistic when history has shown that it is. Is it about body type? Because as we've mentioned, Butterbean has knocked some fools out. Roy Nelson beat some people. I don't know how many UFC heavyweights you all think look like Brock Lesnar, Shane Carwin, or Francis Ngannou, but I guarantee you, it ain't a lot. That's not the standard. That's the exception to the rule. Usually, they're not ripped. Usually, they don't look like Big E, no disrespect to him. They don't look like Hulk Hogan. They don't look like the Ultimate Warrior. They don't look like Ravishing Rick Rude. At least at that size, scaled for 230 pounds and above. And hey, if you want to talk realistic, I hope you're not wanting heavyweight matches going longer than about 3 or 5 minutes without these guys getting gassed, because that's what happens. Super heavyweights just don't have fights in the UFC anymore. They weren't good. The fights were not entertaining. The guys gassed out. Far too often in heavyweight fights, the fighters gas out in a round or two. So unless you want all those matches between all those heavyweights to last about 6-7 minutes, you got to start questioning what is believable. Guys, leave a thumbs up on this video. Tell me what you liked, what you didn't like about this new setup. We're going to do more of these. Make sure you guys subscribe. Until next time, we're out.